Student engagement strategies. Over the next 10 minutes, we'll introduce the first semester's PD cycle, and we'll summarize the first chapter of the book we'll all be reading over the next few months. By the end of this video, you will understand the Semester 1 PD cycle, know why we're focusing on engagement, understand the definition of engagement, the 4 questions, and the research behind it, know the different types of memory and how they interact, understand how engagement strategies lead to equity in the classroom.
During this cycle, teachers will meet in small groups to learn and reflect on research-based strategies for building student engagement in their classrooms. Participants will read, discuss, and implement strategies from Robert Marzano's The Highly Engaged Classroom in order to build a common definition of student engagement and to expand our toolbox of engagement strategies. Teachers will reflect on their own implementation of strategies and will receive feedback and input from their peers.
This slide shows what we'll be doing on each of the Fridays between now and winter break. The light blue boxes show the 8 weeks of Friday PD time we'll spend focused on the strategies in the highly engaged classroom. The dates in dark blue represent Fridays that we will either be on break or working on other things, like progress reports or parent conferences. The 8 weeks will conclude in the middle of November. After that, we'll have several Fridays focused on content area PD. Those topics will be determined in the next few months.
The highly engaged classroom is broken into 4 major chapters. Accordingly, our 8 weeks will be broken into 4 2-week mini-cycles, each focused on one chapter. The first week in a mini-cycle will focus on the strategies highlighted in a chapter. During the following week, participants will try out a strategy from that chapter, and that following Friday will be devoted to sharing insights gained from these trials. Participants may debrief peer observations, watch videos from one another's classrooms, or reflect on their use of the strategy. For example, this Friday, August 19th, we'll be focused on the strategies in Chapter 2, How Do I Feel? Next Friday, we'll still be focused on those strategies, but we'll spend our time sharing what we learned from trying these strategies out.
At Kansas, we'll have 3 groups. Each group will have a mix of teachers from different grade levels and specialties. At Georgia, groups will be organized by content area.
So you may be wondering, why are we focusing on engagement? We're focusing on engagement because in order for every student to be successful, every student must be engaged in their learning. Research tells us that engagement is necessary to maximizing academic achievement. In accordance with our race and equity work, all of our students must experience school as interesting and important, and they must feel accepted and capable of doing the work. Based on ELH's data from classroom observations, behavior records, and assessments, the instructional leadership team determined engagement as the first area of focus for this year.
We're now going to spend a few minutes highlighting some of the important ideas from Chapter 1 in the highly engaged classroom. Here are the big ideas. The book emphasizes that student engagement happens as a result of a teacher's careful planning and execution of specific strategies. The highly engaged classroom summarizes the research behind student engagement and translates that research into practical strategies for the classroom.
Engagement is a very difficult concept to define. Definitions often mention things like motivation, attention, effort, participation, involvement, etc. The authors of this book, Marzano and Pickering, examined the research to come up with a model of student engagement. Their model is based on 4 important constructs that come together to create student engagement: emotions, interests, perceived importance, and perceptions of efficacy. They use 4 emblematic questions to organize their model. How do I feel? Am I interested? Is this important? And can I do this?
The model focuses on the related constructs of attention and engagement. The authors define attention as positive answers to the first 2 questions. How do I feel? and am I interested? Engagement is defined by positive answers to, is this important? And can I do this?
This theory of attention and engagement is supported by research into memory systems. Sensory memory addresses the temporary storage of data from the senses. Sensory memory holds information from the outside world for only a very brief amount of time. If you are not paying attention to that information and actively processing it, the data decay will not make it to your working memory. Working memory is where data are actively processed. It can be understood as where our consciousness resides. Information can come into a person's working memory from the outside world through sensory memory or from permanent memory. We as teachers are always competing for our students' consciousness. Our lessons have to win out over the permanent memories that are competing for a place in our students' working memory. Permanent memories from last night's TV show or the argument on the playground. The question you should be asking yourself now is, how can a teacher ensure students are paying attention so that information makes it from sensory memory to working memory? And once that information is in a student's consciousness, how do we ensure that it goes from working memory to permanent memory?
Like we just discussed, students will not have a conscious experience of information if that information does not make it into the working memory. How does the brain decide what makes it into the working memory? Research tells us that if students have negative emotions or low energy, or if they do not consider the information interesting, working memory will not process it. Students must be emotionally ready and must be interested to move sensory information into working memory. If these two conditions are not met, the student essentially has no conscious experience of the event or information. They need to be paying attention.
Now that the information is in working memory, how do we ensure that information makes it from working memory into permanent memory? The key here is engagement. If information is not deemed important, working memory will not maintain it for long and will not transfer the information to permanent memory. Also, if students do not believe they can perform tasks relevant to the information, the brain will eventually reject it.
So now we'll give a little bit of information about the research that supports the 4 defining questions. The first one being, how do I feel? We know that feeling impacts human behavior. Research tells us that some emotions are associated with engagement, but others can cause a lack of engagement. When our emotions are negative, we are less likely to engage in new activities or challenging tasks. Essentially, emotions set the stage for attention. We all know that the classroom certainly influences emotional state. This book looks at 3 areas in which classroom environment can impact a student's ability to attend. Classroom activities influence student energy levels, which in turn impact attention. Also, the teacher's demeanor and the student's perception of acceptance by peers and teachers can either positively or negatively impact the student's ability to attend.
Even if an individual is engaged emotionally, he or she may still fail to attend to a new activity simply because he or she doesn't perceive it as interesting. What is happening in the classroom must capture and hold students' attention, or the information will not be processed in working memory, and the student will turn attention to thinking about last night's TV show. Research suggests 4 ways teachers can trigger interest in a classroom situation: using games, initiating friendly controversy, hooking students with unusual information, and using effective questioning strategies.
If a student answers yes to the question, is this important, they are more likely to stay involved in the task at hand. Okay, so what makes something important or unimportant to students? The answer to this question is found largely in research and theory on goals and personal identity. The self system refers to our sense of self, the way we see ourselves. This system is informed by what we experience in our family, our culture, and the wider society. Through our REIS work, we know that students' sense of identity can help determine what they see as important. Another way to facilitate connections between short and long-term goals is to use cognitively complex tasks with real-world applications. When students are asked to merely regurgitate information in a repetitive fashion, they will not see the relevance of the information.
The last question has to do with self-efficacy. We know from research that if a student does not think that they are capable of learning or performing, they will eventually disengage. Possible selves are cognitive representations of an individual's future, what a person can imagine for themselves. Internalized stereotypes can limit what a student believes they can achieve. Similarly, theories students hold about intelligence and the value of hard work have a powerful influence over how they view school and their role in it. So for homework, by Friday, we want you to have watched this video, which you have, so thank you. We would like you to have read chapters 1 and 2, and at the end of chapter 2, please complete the self-assessment. Even though we have summarized chapter 1 here, there's a lot of really interesting information and research cited in the chapter, so again, be sure you look through all of it. Have a great evening.